I want to thank the worship team. Did they leave already? I guess they did. Oh, they went to Bible fellowship. Good for them. Anyway, I want to thank them. They've been wonderful. And she's playing a Canadian guitar, so that's even better. It's not that bad out there. You guys are wusses. Like I was trying to figure out, someone was telling me that Jimmy Fallon was talking about, I guess the government shut down this week sometime during a blizzard. I'm from Western Canada originally. If it's 30 below and you can see your hand in the blizzard, you go to school. You know, like that's just the way it is. And when they were telling me they were thinking of not having the service, I thought, well, I could sleep in. But then my immediate thought, for you who are streaming stayed at home because of the snow, you're wusses. That's the best I can say at this point. But we missed you. But for you who came, thank you. If you could open your Bibles. Don, when he asked me to speak, it's interesting that he went to Dallas when he asked me to speak. But when he asked me to speak, he asked me to talk about some of the things that I talked about down in Virginia, or down in Hampton at the Virginia Baptist Convention. I should apologize. I have laryngitis. And you might not know it, but my voice might quit sometime in the midst of this. So I've been fighting this for about 5 weeks. It's called the 100-day cough. It's a new cold in Canada, and I brought it to you. And probably it will spread now amongst you, and you'll remember the Canadian who visited. He asked me to speak, and so if you were at the Virginia Convention, some of the stories I'm going to use, I use there as well, just to illustrate. But I want to kind of give you a sense of what's been happening in Canada. One of the phrases that I like to talk about is the fact that more and more Canadians have less and less Christian memory. Let me say that again. More and more Canadians have less and less Christian memory. There was a time when more people went to church on a Sunday morning per capita in Canada than went to church in the United States per capita. We were a churched country. Matter of fact, in the 50s, 70% of all Canadians in their mind got up on a Sunday morning and said, I'm going to church. Now, that percentage is much lower. I remember when I was pastoring in Edmonton, a psychology professor from the University of Alberta became a person of faith. He had had no Christian memory. So all of the habits that you now know, even in the winter, getting up on a Sunday morning and coming to church, he had none of that. And Sunday mornings for him was this wonderful experience of brunch. Do you remember brunch? If you weren't a Christian at one time, do you remember brunch? Well, he would say to me, he would say, you know, I loved brunch, Gary. I would get up and I'd get my newspaper on a Sunday morning, big, thick New York Times. Even there, we read the New York Times. And he said, and I'd get in my car and I'd drive up to the upper level diner. And he said, I would come to the T in the road and I'd turn left and I'd go under the legislative building and over to the upper level diner. He said, then I became a Christian. And he said, now I come to that T in the road and it's left for blueberry waffles or right for your sermon. He said, I need to tell you that 75% of the time I turn right. But he said, sometimes I go and I remember what it was like. And blueberry waffles win over your sermon. And then I get there and I remember why. It was such a good time. In 1955, more people in Canada went to church than in the United States per capita. Now, on a given Sunday in most places, in most cities like Toronto or Vancouver, the percentage is under 10%. My favorite statistic is that in Vancouver, more people sail on a Sunday morning in the summer than go to church in the summer. That's the kind of world. So more and more Canadians have less and less memory, Christian memory. But I'm here to tell you that it's the same in the States. That more and more Americans have less and less Christian memory. It's not 1955 anymore. In 1990, I decided to go back into the pastorate, which I missed, and I went to the First Baptist Church, Edmonton, which in my tribe of denominations was like the laboratory for going and trying to put your body where your mouth is. It was an old cathedral church. In the 1950s, you used to have to line up to get into that church on a Sunday morning. On Monday, the preacher's sermon was quoted in the newspaper. In that day, it was an incredible thing. If something important was happening, that pastor was asked to be on the committee that was planning it. He was on the board of the Edmonton Eskimos, which is a football team, professional football team in Canada. He used to tell me this. He was also a great singer. He was Welsh, and he beat Robert Goulet. Do you remember that name? He beat Robert Goulet in a competition. He was somebody in that city, and he was still alive when I came, unfortunately. In 1955, he was named one of the top 10 preachers in Canada. Somebody in the Star Weekly, which was a national newspaper at the time, it's now gone, but it was a national newspaper, magazine, and somebody in the editorial board said, let's go across Canada. Now just get this in your mind in the 21st century, in 2015. Let's go across Canada, 1955, and find out who's the best preachers in Canada. Can you imagine Time Magazine's editorial board going, a reporter coming in and said, let's go find out who the top 10 preachers in Canada, or in the United States are. Nobody cares. Anyway, he was named one of the top 10 preachers. And I know this because he was still alive. And I would go to visit him on Tuesdays every third week. And if you're a pastor, you'll know what that feels like. This was not one of the joyful, just a little insight into pastoral life. This is not one of the joyful pastoral visits. There are some people you love to go see, and then there are some people that you just go to. And Edgar was one of those places. I mean, it was just a gutted up, go, suffer, as he spent most of his time telling me what I was doing wrong. And if you know this, there were only 40 people left in the church when I first arrived. This sanctuary that sat 800 people it was just so empty. It was like this place. Not empty, but it's like this place in the sense of this size. And you could shoot a cannon and not hit a soul. And I was wondering, what had I done? Why had I left what I was doing to come to this place? And they were resisting everything that was needing to happen. I finally one day had to say to them, where are all your children? If this is such a great church, where are all your children? It was a terrible thing, but it started the conversation for change. Anyway, Edgar would kind of decided he was going to tell me what I was doing wrong, and I was so insecure at that time. I was in the middle of everything, and every time he said it, it just became a tape in my head, and I would know that I was bad at what I was doing, and he just kind of hammered away at me. He was senile by that time, and I get that, and all of those things, but it still hurt. And then I would pray for him, dear God. That kind of a prayer. And then I would shake his hand, and he always said this to me. He'd say, Gary, did you know I was named one of the top 10 preachers in Canada in 1955? And I'd say, well, no, I'd heard. It was hard not to miss it because there was a picture. There was the picture from the magazine. He'd framed it, and he'd typed, Dr. Edgar Bailey named one of the top 10 preachers in Canada in 1955, and he'd scotch taped it to the frame. So it wasn't hard to miss. And then he'd always ask me this. He said, Gary, have you ever been named one of the top 10 preachers in Canada? I remember I'd say things like, no, Edgar, I just hope people show up on a Sunday morning in the winter. I just hope they show up. Then I'd go out to my car and I'd think carnal thoughts. You know, one-line zingers that would just kind of, I never used them, but boy, they felt good. I would sit for about 15 minutes in my car, either crying and thinking of carnal thoughts or just being angry. And my best one was this. Edgar. Whatever happened to Star Weekly anyway? That was good, eh? That was the magazine. It was gone. It's been gone for 15, 20 years. I mean, it's dead. It's gone. And that story for me, and I shared this in the Virginia Convention, that story for me has been the paradigm story of just what you and I are going through. This amazing shift. It is not 1955 anymore. And because of that, we are being challenged to be the church in a different time. And if you don't like the time you're in, just look up to us in Canada, because we're like a time-lapse camera of where you're going. Sorry. The bearer of bad news. We're like where you're headed. And I used to think it was far in the distance when I would come down here. But if you think of what changes have been going on in society in the last 3 to 4 years, it's moving way faster than you could understand. And we're living in a time in which the church and people of faith are being challenged to be salt and light in new ways. And the big challenging question is, what kind of church do you want to be in the midst of this? And that's why Psalm 137 is so critical. And if you have your Bibles or your phone or your iPad or whatever you use, turn to Psalm 137. It's this fascinating psalm. It's written, it also has a good song to it if you've ever sung the Bon Am song, By the Rivers of Babylon. But this is the psalmist writing from a place he doesn't want to be. He's not an immigrant. In other words, he didn't make a choice to go there. He's not a refugee. I mean, he didn't flee to be protected there. He has been ripped violently. He's been torn out of the place that gave him meaning, that gave him place, that gave him belonging. He's been ripped out of that place, and he's been brought to this place, and he's been sat down, and nothing feels like it used to feel. Nothing feels familiar. Nothing feels at all like it should have been. His experience is like my mother, who is now 90. And I grew up in Calgary, Alberta, in what was in my denomination the flagship church, First Baptist Church, Calgary. 2 balconies, full every Sunday. Now on a Sunday morning, 130 people. And my mother, and my friend is the pastor there, interestingly enough, and there's some new things beginning to bubble up. But my mother just feels like everything is foreign now. It's not the way it used to be. And the day that they moved the pulpit, the big, hunking pulpit, and moved it off the platform was the day my mother said, I just don't like it anymore like this. I know we have to change, but can they wait till I die? And that's the psalmist here. The psalmist is sitting in Babylon, and nothing is familiar. And he cries out with the question, how do I sing the songs of Zion in a foreign land? First of all, they're making fun of them. They say, come on. This is the tone it should be. Come on, sing us one of those songs of Zion. And the psalmist cries out, how do I sing the songs of Zion in a foreign land? Like, this is the cry of the church in the 21st century. This is the cry of believers sitting in workplaces on a Monday morning, seeking for a connection between Sunday and Monday. This is the cry of all of us who are trying to figure out, what does it mean for me to be a follower of Jesus Christ in this time? How do I sing the songs of Zion in a foreign land? And look at the response of the psalmist. That's what's so fascinating here. He does what we all do in the initial stages of asking that question. How do I sing the songs of Zion in a foreign land? The first thing that he does is he remembers how good it used to be. Have you ever noticed that? That memories they fuel us? Like, have you ever noticed that the way we remember is not necessarily the way it really was? You should hear my brother's description of my family. He's my older brother, and he's a bit of a romantic. And he'll describe things in our family that happened when we were kids. And I'll look at him and I'll go, John, that never happened. But he's kind of made up a family life that I don't know where he got it, but I mean, we had a great family, but it isn't what he describes. My mother remembers my childhood in elementary school much different than it really was. I'll tell you. Grade 3, I spent most of the year in the cloakroom. They let me come out for lectures. Grade 4, in the hall, which actually worked out pretty good because my friends going to the washroom, I could talk to them. I think I was ADD. Grade 5, they finally put me on a behavior modification program. It was a long time ago, but I can remember I had to take a book home every weekend to my parents about all the bad things that I'd done. Please don't do any of these things. But I used to do, anyway, so I remember this time so vividly because there was one time where I got 3 strikes in 1 minute. I was spinning scissors, and she said, write that down in the book. And I was so mad that I grabbed the desk drawer, and I pulled out my desk drawer, and it came right out, and everything fell on the floor, and she said, write that down too. And then I swore, and she said, write that down too. I mean, it was just, so this is what my mother sees. She says that the principal, Mrs. Leadbeater, it's the real name, Mrs. Leadbeater, she says, Mrs. Leadbeater just didn't like little boys. That's how my mother has shaped her memory. We have a way of doing that, of making the past way better than it used to be. My mother even remembers the church that way. My mother ran into Mrs. Leadbeater in a Loblaw store, which is like a market. I don't know what your markets are here, but it's a supermarket. And she came up to Mrs. Leadbeater because Mrs. Leadbeater had told her that I would amount to nothing. And so she came up to her and she said, do you know that my son is a Baptist minister and the president of a university? I said, Mom, I'm not sure that being a Baptist minister would mean much to Mrs. Leadbeater. But that's her memory. Memories have a way of being way better than they were. They also are comfortable. If you live in your memories, they're kind of comfortable. They kind of wrap you up and they make you feel good. They're not the present, but they sure feel good. Do you remember when? My wife and I take our clothes. I love to shop, and I know I'm an odd male. I'm a bit of a priss in many ways, though I played football in university. But I love to shop, and so I can't go shopping unless I cull. You know, you got to take stuff out before you can fill them in. So I take stuff to the consignment store, as she does. And we were at the consignment store taking some stuff in, and I started looking at the men's section, and I found this great pair of khakis. They're an amazing, they were Banana Republic, they fit perfectly, and I knew they'd be great for golf. And so I went into the dressing room, I tried them on, and I came out, and I prance. I come out and I pranced around showing Carla how good they are. And I said, these would be great for golf. And Carla says, I think you're right. They're great pants. They look great. They're like new. I said, I think I'm going to buy them. And she said, I think you should. So I went, bought them, and took them home. And then whenever I get home, some of you do this. Come on, I know you do. I put them on again, right? Put them on in the bathroom, came out, started prancing again. I said, you know, these are going to be so great for golf, I said. And she said, I think they will. That's the way you used them the last time you owned them. You see, she had gone up to the cash register and she said, he's trying the pants in that he brought in a few months ago. Just let him buy them. Let him buy them. This is going to be really fun. You have to meet Carla. You have to meet Carla. She never let on that she knew until that one moment where she could get that one zinger in. That's what she used them for the last time. Memories are comfortable. But you know what? Memories are comfortable, but they absolutely have no relevance in the present if you're living in them. Living out of them is one thing. Learning from them, yes, all of those kinds of things. But when most of us, in the midst of the changes around us, want to hunker down, hide out, do all the things that we possibly can, and to kind of just settle into those memories and not have to deal with the way the world is today. I would say that's the great challenge of the 21st century for we are the followers of Christ. I mean, I know the world is confusing. But this is the world you and I have been given. The next thing that the psalmist does here, which is so fascinating, is he gets angry. This, in the Revised Common Lectionary, these verses are actually taken out because they're absolutely the psalmist at his worst. I mean, he is angry. He wants violence on the people that have hurt him. All of those kind of things. My daughter never went to Sunday school and memorized these verses, right? They never were part of her memorization plan. And they're taken out. But listen to what he says. Remember, this is him at his worst. Remember, O Lord, against the Edomites, the day of Jerusalem fall, how they said, tear it down, down to its foundations. O daughter of Babylon, you devastator, happy shall they be who pay you back what you have done. Happy shall they be, now listen to this. Happy shall they be who take their little ones and dash them against the rocks. Actually, one translation says, takes their little ones and dashes their heads against the rocks. Lovely passage. I want you all to go home and memorize that tonight. I mean, it's dreadful. In the midst of all that the psalmist is struggling with, he's struggling with an anger that he can't control. And that's the terrible thing about anger. Anger just is a release. It's a release that kind of leads into something, but it doesn't help you sense what needs to happen in the present. You become so consumed in the anger, the way the world has become, the way that things have changed, and you become so angry, and you find yourself unable to deal with the present. You're just so caught up in the anger. You know people like that. I'm dealing with a couple of professors who keep saying to me, we need to tell people where we stand. You know? We need to tell them where we stand. And I keep saying to them, they know where we stand. It's not enough to say where you stand anymore in the 21st century. You have got to figure out how to navigate and negotiate what it is in the midst of the world that you're in. So this is the psalmist. How do I sing the songs of Zion in a foreign land? First thing he does is he remembers. Second thing he does is he gets so caught up in his memories, all he can do is be angry that he's not part of it again. That things have changed so much. Does this feel familiar? Well, I want you to jump with me. I don't know what the number is in your Pew Bible, but if you have a phone, you can get there quick. Jeremiah 29. I actually think Jeremiah 29 is God's response to the psalmist. Jeremiah 29, verse 4. It's God's response to the people who are in exile, who are asking this question, how do I sing the songs of Zion in a foreign land? This is like your marching call. This is like what you and I are being called to do. And listen to what he says. This is God speaking through the prophet Jeremiah. And he says, thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, to all of the exiles whom I've sent into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. Build houses. Live in them. Plant gardens. Eat what they produce. Take wives and daughters. Have sons. And give your daughters in marriage that they may bear sons and daughters. Multiply there and do not decrease. But seek the welfare of the city. See, here's the problem with anger. God may be trying to tell you something new, but you're so caught up in your anger about the way things have changed that you're missing what God is wanting to say to you at this point. Happens all the time in church. I still remember a time I was preaching and I got carried away, as we are wont to do. And I just felt God was saying, have an altar call. And so I said, if anybody wants to come forward to take Jesus seriously, I want you to come. And it was one of those God moments. It was just unbelievable. Like they just started coming down the aisle to the front of the church. It was one of those remarkable times. I remember just sitting there going, whoa, because I usually miss a lot of this stuff, and this was just amazing. And my colleague came over to me and he said, we got the baptistry ready for tonight. Why don't we baptize them now? I thought it was a good idea, right? I just thought it was a good idea. So 18 people that Sunday. We baptized. I remember it because you've got a very nice baptistry. Ours wasn't as nice. And the stairs were wooden, and about the 10th person being baptized, the stairs broke off. It was really quite funny because the woman stepped down, and she just kind of fell in. It was one of those funny moments in baptisms. And from that point on, the deacons kind of they would lift people into the water. It was a remarkable time. And I remember that for that, but then I remember how easy it is to be so caught up in your anger that you miss the moment, you miss the God thing. Because I went to the back and I was shaking hands, and the woman came up to me, shook my hand, and she said to me, "Did you know that the organ was too loud today?" I remember thinking, were you in the same service as me? Did we miss something here? Like, at some point, did you go blind? Like, what happened? Now, that happens in churches all the time. So caught up in their memories. So caught up in their anger about the way things are that they miss what God is trying to say. And that's what Jeremiah 29 is about. Jeremiah 29 is about, I put you here. Notice, verse 4. Thus said the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, to all the exiles whom I have sent into exile. Do you hear that? It's not 1955 anymore. Get over it. Get on with it. I mean, that's basically his message. I put you here. It's your time. It is your time to be people of faith at this point in history, not in that point in history. And I know if you have good memories of what it was so good to be a person of faith at certain times, I know how hard it is to give up. My mother's 90, my father is 94, and I'm sorry. Even they have to realize that God kept them around for a reason. One of the wonderful things about the renewal that happened in Edmonton was it was the older people in our congregation who welcomed the new ones. I still remember when one of the guys who died, he was the original greeter of the 40 that were left. Jim Kidney greeted people at the door. And when he died, by that time the church was full. And when he died, It was all people under 30 who were his pallbearers. All people who had been greeted as they'd walk through the door. I mean, Jim Kidney was their guy. He said to me one day, the nice thing about what's happening here now at this church, he said, is that all my friends have died, so I have somebody who will show up to my funeral. And he would have loved it because the place was packed. And when they walked him out, it was them that were crying because they didn't imagine what it would be like to live without Jim in the church. I'm sorry. I don't care how old you are. This is your time. This is your time. He says, settle down. Move in. Deal with this time. Try to understand it in this context. Be the church in Jesus' name. Years ago, I was teaching a seminar on evangelism. And it was one of those days where I was trying to describe what I thought needed to happen. And what we were talking about was how the church needs to become, to understand that we as people of faith now cannot just live our faith inside the walls of the church, but we have to understand what it means to be a person of faith wherever we are on a Monday. And we were talking about this. We're talking about some of the implications. I can't remember what the implication was, but one of the guys said, well, if that's what it's going to take, I'm not going to do it. If it means that I have to do that, I'm not interested. And I remember a guy in the same seminar going, I don't understand that. I don't get it. He said, I would do anything. I would do anything. He made a joke. He said, I'd even wear a Speedo bathing suit. He said, I'd do anything if I thought I might win someone to Christ. Paul said that, do you remember? In Corinthians. I'm all things to all people so that I might win some. And here's the tragedy, that for years in Canada, the church resisted doing anything for Christ. And we paid the price. It's just in these last years that you see a new emerging thing happening in churches in Canada. And it's because they're willing to listen to what God is saying at this particular time. And this is the question for you. What kind of church do you want to be? A church of memories? A church just angry about the world because it's going to hell in a handbasket? Can you say that? Or do you want to be the church victorious? Wanting to negotiate and embrace a world with the good news of Jesus Christ so that you might win some. It's probably the most critical question you can ask in the 21st century. What kind of church do you want to be?